Even just for a moment, let's think differently about this question. Tell me a bit about yourself isn't asking for a detailed version of your CV, an autobiography, or your life story. It's really an opening statement. Think like a lawyer giving an opening argument for a trial. Lay out your core message, hint at the points you'll come back to, and help your listener feel oriented. This is where you plant seeds for follow up questions, for example, your research experience, your US rotations, and your long term goals. You don't have to cover everything in detail in your self introduction. You just have to guide the conversation in a direction that lets your strengths come through. Let's take a moment just to preview the framework we're going to be using. This is Omni Interview's APMPF Framework. It's a clear, flexible structure for organizing your story. We're just going to name the 5 components, and if you'd like a more detailed explainer, check out my video, Better Self Introduction. But for now, A, appreciation, P, present, M, motivation, P, past, F, future. This gives you a shape for your answer so you don't ramble or forget what matters. And of course, you can adjust it to your own story while sounding natural and being intentional. So let's take a look at a family medicine applicant who uses this structure for their self introduction. Thank you for meeting with me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation and learning how your program approaches both patient care and resident development. I'm originally from South Korea and have spent the past 2 years in the US, where I've completed clinical rotations in family medicine and in geriatrics. I currently work in public health research focused on chronic illness and aging. These experiences have helped me deepen my clinical communication in English to navigate interdisciplinary teams and support patients from a range of backgrounds. Colleagues have often described me as calm, attentive, and highly dependable, especially in settings where patients are overwhelmed or also navigating complex care decisions. What has always kept me close to family medicine is the ability to follow patients across life stages. I find deep meaning in continuity, being present not just during illness, but in the quiet, everyday moments that build trust over time. For me, medicine is as much about presence as it is about diagnosis, and I try to carry that into every interaction I have with patients or colleagues. For 14 years, I worked as a primary care physician in Korea. I cared for children, adults, elders, often across 3 generations of the same family. I became particularly engaged in preventative care and patient education, especially with older adults managing multiple conditions. I also trained junior physicians and led local outreach initiatives, which gave me a broader view of healthcare beyond the clinic. Those years shaped how I approach care with steadiness, humility, and a strong respect for each patient's lived experience. Now, as I look into my next steps, I'm applying to family medicine because I want to keep serving communities in ways that are relational, practical, and grounded in primary care. At this stage of my career, I'm interested in training in the US because of that structured education, the strong emphasis on team based care, and the commitment to underserved populations. Your program stood out to me because of its continuity clinic model and community health focus. Long term, I hope to practice in a setting that allows me to combine outpatient medicine with preventative outreach, especially with immigrant families and older adults. I'd bring not only my clinical experience, but also a steady, collaborative mindset shaped by many years of practice. Let's begin our conversation and analysis here by looking at the specific seeds that this applicant plants, and then we'll look at the introduction piece by piece. This self introduction involves some carefully structured moments that plant strategic seeds for a high leverage interview. That first seed, it comes early on with this line. The candidate says, I've completed clinical rotations in family medicine and geriatrics and currently work in public health research focused on chronic illness and aging. And I think that this is an interesting seed because that single sentence, it quietly signals several things that could be explored further without telling the full story. For example, US clinical experience, comfort in interdisciplinary settings, and the ability to speak about healthcare both from a clinical and a public health perspective. It's the kind of detail that invites follow up questions. Question could be, what did you take away from those US rotations? Or can you tell me a bit more about your research? It also shows the candidate is already operating within the US system and doing it successfully. The next seed is character based. It's this moment when the applicant says, colleagues have often described me as calm, attentive, and highly dependable, especially in settings where patients are overwhelmed or navigating complex care decisions. And that's not self promotion or a vague personality trait, it's grounded in context. It gives the interviewer a natural opening to ask for a real example of that steadiness under pressure. It shows emotional maturity, which residency programs value deeply, especially in high stress or high stakes clinical moments. Another key moment of reflection is here. The applicant says, what has always kept me close to family medicine is the ability to follow patients across life stages. I find deep meaning in continuity. This isn't just a generic interest in primary care, it's a values driven reason for choosing the specialty. The language here is patient centered, emotionally grounded, and connected to long term care. And that makes it easier for an interviewer to follow up by asking, can you describe a meaningful long term relationship you've had with a patient? Or perhaps, what does continuity of care mean to you in practice? A fourth seed is clinical depth. The applicant says, for 14 years, I worked as a primary care physician in Korea across 3 generations of the same family. And that signals credibility and a high level of responsibility. It sets the stage for case studies about multi generational care, about cultural humility, mentorship, or community outreach. For an interviewer, it might spark curiosity. What kind of leadership roles did you hold? Or how did that experience shape the way you approach care here in the US? And then there's the final piece, a clear, thoughtful articulation of goals. The applicant says, I hope to combine outpatient medicine with preventative outreach, especially with immigrant families and older adults. And that's not just ambition, it's alignment. It shows that this applicant has taken time to research the program and reflect on how it fits with long term goals. The message is, I'm not applying broadly, I'm applying intentionally. Each of these seeds serves a purpose. They don't just provide information, they open the door for the kinds of questions that let a candidate demonstrate emotional intelligence, clinical insight, and mission alignment. That's what we want a self introduction to do, not just to explain the past, but to actively shape where the interview goes. So now that we've taken a look at a few of the seeds, let's speak about the specific components of the self introduction in light of the APMPF framework. First, what works so well is in the present section of the self introduction. It's that the applicant isn't just listing recent activities, they're choosing details that show adaptability, clinical readiness, and cultural fluency. Rotations in family medicine and geriatrics, combined with research in chronic illness and aging, speak to real world experience and alignment with family medicine. Soft skills that they mention, like attentiveness and dependability, they're not just mentioned, they're grounded in settings that matter, like helping overwhelm patients through complex decisions. This builds trust. The motivation section is short, but it's not shallow. It's personal, it's patient centered, and specialty specific. Talking about continuity and quiet moments shows a deep respect for long term relationships in care. And the idea that medicine is as much about presence as diagnosis, that's a powerful statement. It gives the interviewer insight into not just what motivates this applicant, but how they see the role of a physician. There's a lot in the past section, but it's delivered with restraint. 14 years of experience could easily dominate the conversation, but here it's offered with focus. The applicant highlights the scope of their care, their engagement in prevention and education, and their leadership in outreach and teaching. These are seeds that could lead to excellent follow up questions, and more importantly, they establish this applicant as someone who has thought deeply about care across generations and systems. The future section is also strong, and this section succeeds because it ties together vision and alignment. The applicant names specific elements of the program that appeal to them, the continuity clinic, and community health, and then ties those to personal goals. The long term vision isn't just about career ambition, it's about service and contribution. That kind of mindset stands out. And the final line, a steady collaborative mindset shaped by many years of practice, it wraps it all up beautifully. And of course, throughout this answer, the applicant plants powerful seeds: U.S. rotations, public health research, decades of clinical experience, cross cultural communication. Any of those could lead to rich, meaningful questions from the interviewer. This is the APMPF framework in action, not as a checklist, but as a roadmap for clarity and impact. Here's what I would like for you to take away from this example as you move forward in your process. In your introductions present section, don't just name what you're doing now, connect it to what that says about you as a physician. Think about what story your present experience is telling. When speaking about your motivation to work as a physician, don't just settle for cliches like, I love helping people. Push yourself to articulate how you help and why it matters to you. Let your motivation reflect your clinical philosophy. A strong future section connects your goals to the program's mission. Be clear about what you hope to do and why this program is the right place to grow. When discussing your past, focus less on quantity and more on depth. Show how your experience shapes the way you think and practice today. Now that we've spoken about some of the strategy behind the thinking that you should do before you begin, let's now take a look at some best practices once you have an idea of what you would like to say in your self introduction. First, begin by creating bullet points. Don't write full scripts. You're not trying to recite a monologue, and consider this for a moment. Writing is linear and speaking is dynamic. You're trying to sound like a real person who's clear, prepared, and reflective. Don't speak like a robot. By the way, my self introduction worksheet is a great starting point for exactly this kind of first step. You can request it in the link in the description. I'll be sure to send it out right away. And if you'd like a more personalized approach on your self introduction and residency interview preparation, let's find us time to speak one on one. My booking link it's also in the description. Second, practice by speaking out loud. Even if you're practicing alone, there is so much benefit to speaking out loud. You don't have to record yourself, but you do have to get to the end of the answer every time that you give an attempt. Let your brain hear your voice. That's how you train fluency under pressure. And third, as you're practicing out loud, be open to being highly unsatisfied with those first few attempts. After all, this is part of practice, and it's much better to be unsatisfied while you're practicing than unsatisfied when you're interviewing. And I think that that dissatisfaction is actually an opportunity. Set a marker at the moments that you think you could make a better point and keep going. And then come back to those markers later and think of what you could say better. This is a natural process of evolution, and a great self introduction goes through this process. Fourth, decide what seeds you want to plant. Pick a few moments that invite natural questions. Think about how you could plant those seeds in your self introduction and what possible follow up questions those seeds could grow into. And fifth, most importantly, let go of perfection. You don't need to sound flawless. You just need to sound real. Prioritize progress over perfection. And if you'd like to take a look at your self introduction with me one on one, count on my support. My booking link is in the description. We can put a time on the calendar. If you're working on your self introduction, get started now by writing a few ideas that you could include in each of the sections: appreciation, present, motivation, past, future. Of course, a medical residency interview is much more than just introducing yourself. And if there's a question that you're struggling with, one that's keeping you up at night, let me know in the comments. I'd love to feature that question in my next video. If you found this video helpful, give it a like and share it with a colleague who's also preparing for their residency interview. And be sure to subscribe so that Omni Interview is on your team. I publish new content regularly, so let's be sure that you're in the know. And of course, if you want my self introduction worksheet, just use the link in the description. I'll be sure to send it to you right away. As you move forward in your preparation, just remember you don't need perfect English to leave a strong impression. What you need is structure, clarity, and self awareness that helps you identify your story. And I guarantee you, your story is one that's absolutely worth telling. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.